My 33M husband accused me, 30F, of murder out of the blue. How do I salvage this? So, I don't even know where to begin with this, and honestly, I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. For context, my husband, Derek 33M, and I 30F have been married for 6 years, together for 10. We've had a pretty solid relationship, with the usual ups and downs, but nothing like this, until now. A few months ago, Derek's sister, Emily 9F, tragically passed away in a car accident. It was a freak thing, a hit and run, and they never found the driver. Emily was a sweet soul, loved by everyone who knew her. She was Derek's only sibling, and they were incredibly close. Losing her was devastating for him, and understandably, he hasn't been the same since. The grief has been overwhelming, and we've both been trying to cope in our own ways. I've been doing my best to be supportive, giving him space when he needs it, and just being there for him as much as I can. But in the last couple of weeks, something has changed. About 2 weeks ago, Derek started acting distant. He would leave the room when I entered, stop talking to me unless absolutely necessary, and avoided eye contact. At first, I thought it was just the grief taking a new turn, so I gave him even more space. But then, he started sleeping on the couch, and when I asked him about it, he would mumble something about needing time to think. Then, 3 days ago, he dropped a bombshell. Out of nowhere, while we were having dinner the first time we'd sat down together in days, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Did you kill Emily?" I was stunned. I literally dropped my fork. I asked him what the hell he was talking about, and he just stared at me with this cold, almost foreign look in his eyes and repeated, "Did you kill Emily?" I was so shocked that I started crying. Emily was like a sister to me. We were close. Not as close as she was with Derek, but close. The idea that I could have anything to do with her death was so absurd that I could barely find the words to respond. I managed to stammer out a no, of course not. But he just shook his head and left the table. Later that night, after crying myself to sleep in our bed alone, I woke up to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, holding his phone. He looked at me with this mix of anger and sadness and said, "Then why did I get these?" He handed me his phone, and there were a series of messages from an unknown number. The messages were cryptic, with phrases like "she knows more than she's saying" and "ask her about the accident." She was there. There was no name or identifying information in the messages, just a string of numbers. The messages didn't make any sense to me. I wasn't there when Emily had her accident. I was at work. I even have colleagues who can vouch for me. But Derek wasn't interested in my explanations. He just kept saying, "Why would someone send this if it wasn't true?" I tried to reason with him, asking him to consider who might want to hurt us like this, who would benefit from driving a wedge between us. But he just kept coming back to the same question, why would someone send this if it wasn't true? I've been racking my brain, trying to figure out who would want to do this to us. Derek doesn't have any enemies, and I certainly don't. Our life is pretty low-key. We both work regular jobs, have a small circle of friends, and aren't involved in anything shady. I can't think of anyone who would want to send these messages, let alone frame me for something so horrific. But Derek is convinced. He hasn't said it outright, but I can see it in his eyes, the way he looks at me now, like I'm some kind of monster. It's killing me inside. I love him so much, and to have him look at me with suspicion, with disgust, it's unbearable. He's been staying in a hotel for the past couple of days, saying he needs time to process everything. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to scream and demand that he believe me, that he trust me after everything we've been through. But another part of me is terrified that this is the beginning of the end. I should probably mention something else. A few years ago, before Derek and I got married, I was involved in a pretty bad car accident. I was driving home late at night, after a long shift at work when I fell asleep at the wheel and hit another car. The other driver was seriously injured but survived. I was charged with reckless driving and had my license suspended for a year. Derek knew about this, of course. We talked about it when we started dating seriously, and he was supportive. He never judged me for it, and we moved on. But now, with these messages and the accusation, I can't help but wonder if he's connecting the two events in his mind, even though they're completely unrelated. I tried bringing it up with him, hoping that maybe if we talked about it, he'd realize how irrational this all is. But when I mentioned the accident from years ago, he just got quiet and said, maybe it wasn't as unrelated as we thought. That hit me like a punch to the gut. My parents are worried sick about me. I've always been close to them, and they know something's wrong. I haven't told them everything yet, just that Derek and I are going through a rough patch, but I can tell they suspect there's more to it. My mom has been calling me every day, asking if I'm okay, if there's anything she can do. I want to tell them everything, but I'm scared. I'm scared they'll think Derek is losing it, that he's gone off the deep end, and I don't want them to hate him. I don't want to hate him, but I'm also scared that if I don't talk to someone about this, I'm going to lose my mind. I've been thinking about going to therapy, both individually and as a couple, but Derek isn't interested. He says he doesn't need a therapist to tell him what's right in front of his eyes. That hurts, because I really think we need help to get through this. I can't do it alone, and I don't think he can either. I've also considered going to the police about the messages, but Derek was adamant that we don't. He said he doesn't want to involve outsiders in our personal business. But these messages, they feel like more than just a personal issue. It feels like someone is deliberately trying to destroy our lives. I confided in my best friend, Sarah, about what's been going on. She was as shocked as I was when I first heard the accusation. She told me to give Derek some space, but also to be firm about my innocence. She said that if he truly loves me, he'll come around and realize that these messages are nothing but lies. But what if he doesn't? What if he continues to believe that I had something to do with Emily's death? How do I prove my innocence when there's nothing to prove? I wasn't there. I didn't do anything. But how do you convince someone of that when their mind is already made up? Last night, I had a nightmare that Derek was standing over me with a knife, accusing me of things I hadn't done, saying that I needed to pay for what I did to Emily. I woke up in a cold sweat, and for a split second, I didn't know where I was. The bed felt foreign, the room unfamiliar, like I was living someone else's life. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's how I feel right now. My life has become this twisted version of reality where the man I love thinks I'm capable of murder. How do you even begin to salvage something like that? How do you come back from such a deep betrayal of trust? I'm at a complete loss. I don't know what to do or how to fix this. I want to believe that Derek and I can get through this, that our marriage is strong enough to withstand whatever is happening. But the longer this goes on, the more hopeless I feel. I'm scared that I'm losing him. I'm scared that he'll never look at me the same way again. I'm scared that this is going to destroy us. If anyone has been through something similar, or has any advice, I would really appreciate it. I feel so alone right now, and I don't know where to turn. After reading through a lot of your comments, I realized that I needed to talk to Derek's parents. They've been devastated by Emily's death, and I haven't wanted to burden them with more stress, but I felt like they might be able to talk some sense into Derek. So, I went to Derek's parents' house the next day. They welcomed me in with open arms, which made me feel a little better. I wasn't sure how much Derek had told them about the situation, but they didn't seem to treat me any differently. We sat down in their cozy living room, where Emily and Derek had grown up, and I tried to hold back my tears. I started by asking them how they were holding up, how they were dealing with Emily's loss. They told me it's been hard, that some days are better than others, but they're trying to stay strong. I hesitated for a moment, then asked if Derek had mentioned anything strange or unusual to them lately. His mother, Margaret, gave me a concerned look and asked, "Is everything all right between you two?" That's when I broke down. I told them everything, how Derek had accused me of being involved in Emily's death, how he'd been acting distant and cold, and about the mysterious messages. I was a sobbing mess by the time I finished, but they listened patiently, concern etched on their faces. When I was done, Margaret looked shocked, while Derek's father, John, seemed lost in thought. Finally, Margaret spoke up. "I can't believe Derek would think such a thing. He knows you loved Emily like a sister. This doesn't make any sense." John, who had been silent the whole time, finally said, "Derek is struggling, but this is beyond grief. Something else is going on." They asked if Derek had given any indication of who might have sent the messages, but I told them he hadn't. Margaret offered to talk to him, to try and knock some sense into him, but I wasn't sure if that would help or make things worse. Still, I agreed, knowing that I needed all the help I could get. The next day, Derek's parents called me, saying they had spoken to Derek. According to Margaret, he was defensive at first, insisting that he couldn't ignore the messages. But after a long conversation, he seemed to soften a bit, admitting that he didn't want to believe I was involved, but that the messages had shaken him to his core. Margaret told him how ridiculous the accusations were, reminding him of how much I had loved Emily, and how deeply her death had affected me as well. She urged him to come home and talk things out with me, to consider that someone might be trying to manipulate him. That evening, Derek came back home. I could tell he was conflicted. There was a mix of regret and doubt in his eyes. We sat down in the living room, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. "I don't want to believe it," he started, his voice cracking. "But those messages, they're so specific. It's like someone knows something." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Derek, I swear on everything I love, I had nothing to do with Emily's death. I wasn't there. I would never hurt her." He looked at me, searching my face for any sign of deceit. "Then why would someone send those messages? Who would do this?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice breaking, "but we need to find out. We can't let whoever this is tear us apart." We talked for hours, going over everything that had happened, trying to piece together any clues. Derek admitted that the messages had come from a different number each time, making it hard to trace. I suggested again that we go to the police, but Derek was still hesitant, afraid of what they might uncover. I could see the doubt starting to lift, but it wasn't gone completely. He agreed to stay home and work on this together, but I knew we were far from out of the woods. The trust between us had been severely damaged, and I wasn't sure how long it would take to rebuild it, if it was even possible. After our long talk, Derek finally agreed that we needed help beyond just the two of us. Since he was still wary about going to the police, we compromised on hiring a private investigator. I reached out to a reputable PI that one of our mutual friends had recommended. His name was Jack, and he had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. Jack came over to our house the next day, a no-nonsense man in his late 40s with a look that said he had seen it all. We explained the situation to him, showing him the messages and telling him everything that had happened since Emily's death. Jack listened carefully, taking notes and asking pointed questions. He asked Derek if there had been any other strange occurrences, if anyone had been acting suspiciously around him lately, but Derek couldn't think of anything out of the ordinary other than the messages. Of course, Jack promised to look into the phone numbers the messages had come from and see if he could trace them back to anyone. He also said he'd do some digging into Emily's accident, just to see if there was anything that had been missed by the authorities. Derek and I were cautiously hopeful. We didn't want to get our hopes up too much, but it felt like we were finally taking action, like we might be able to get to the bottom of this. It took a couple of weeks, but Jack eventually got back to us with some news. He'd managed to trace a few of the phone numbers back to a prepaid phone that had been purchased at a local convenience store. The store's security footage had been wiped, but the timing of the purchase lined up with the messages. Jack also looked into Emily's accident. He found out that there had been another vehicle at the scene, a black SUV that had been reported stolen just a few days before the accident. The driver of the SUV had never been found. When Jack told us about the stolen SUV, something clicked in Derek's mind. He remembered that one of Emily's old boyfriends, a guy named Rob, had driven a similar vehicle before they broke up. Rob had been possessive and controlling, and Emily had broken things off with him after realizing how toxic the relationship was. We started to wonder if Rob might be involved somehow, though it seemed like a stretch. Derek reached out to some of Emily's old friends to see if anyone had heard from Rob recently, but no one had. He seemed to have vanished after Emily's death, which only added to our suspicions. With Jack's help, we managed to track Rob down. He was living in a rundown apartment on the other side of town, under a different name. It was clear he was hiding from something or someone. Derek and I went to see him, with Jack accompanying us for backup. When we arrived, Rob looked shocked to see Derek. He tried to play it cool, but we could see the fear in his eyes. Derek confronted him about the messages and Emily's accident. At first, Rob denied everything, but when we mentioned the stolen SUV, he started to crack. He admitted that he had been driving the SUV the night of Emily's accident. He claimed it was an accident, that he hadn't meant to hit her, but that he had panicked and fled the scene. As for the messages, Rob said they were sent by a friend of his who had found out about what happened and had been blackmailing him ever since. This friend had somehow found out about Derek's car accident from years ago and thought it would be a perfect way to mess with Derek's head. Derek was furious, but there was also a sense of relief that came with finally knowing the truth. Rob begged us not to go to the police, saying that he would make things right if we kept quiet. But Derek and I knew we couldn't let him get away with what he had done. We called the police and told them everything. Rob was arrested and charged with hit and run and manslaughter. His friend, the one who had been sending the messages, was also brought in for questioning. It's been a few months since everything went down. Derek and I are still together, but it's been a long road to recovery. The trust between us was severely damaged, and we've been working through it in couples therapy. It hasn't been easy, but we're making progress slowly but surely. Derek has apologized countless times for ever doubting me, and I've done my best to forgive him. I know he was in a dark place, dealing with unimaginable grief, but the accusations still hurt. We've both learned a lot about each other through this process, and I think we're stronger for it, even if it doesn't always feel that way. We're also working on rebuilding our lives, trying to find a new normal after everything that's happened. It's going to take time, but we're committed to making it work. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that communication is key. Derek and I have promised each other that we'll never let things get so bad again, that we'll always talk to each other, no matter how hard it might be. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support during this incredibly difficult time. It meant the world to me to know that I wasn't alone, that there were people out there who cared. For anyone else going through something similar, just know that you're stronger than you think, and that with time, things can get better. It might not be easy, but it's possible to come out on the other side. Here's to hoping for better days ahead.